Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to this evening's episode of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, tonight we're going to vie a little way from the global agenda, at least for the majority of the show, because there's a phenomena occurring on British TV that I want to talk about tonight, because I think it's extremely indicative of some of the behaviours that we are seeing today in government and in corporations. And more we are seeing the grooming process to bring these sociopathic behaviours into the public arena and for them to be presented as the norm. And I'm referring, of course, to none other than this programme that we see right here, The Apprentice. There we go. Lord Sugar, previously Sir Alan. I'm not sure what comes next. And Nick Hewer and Karen Brady. Now, this triumvirate, of course, have effectively been on air. Karen, I think, replaced Lord Sugar's assistant, Margaret Mountjoy. Almost had a memory slip there, Margaret Mountjoy. But the programme has been running for 10 years. And obviously there's a very careful selection process, and that process absolutely guarantees the entertainment value of the programme. But behind that entertainment is perhaps something a little bit darker. And, you know, what we're looking at is perhaps the 21st century extension of the 1980s phenomena of Wall Street and Gordon Gekko. And here we see Michael Douglas, of course, in the role that really sent his career stratospheric, in the role of Gordon Gekko and his mantra, "Greed is good." Epitomizing the sort of Alan Greenspan philosophy that was being pumped into the US and the UK economy at that time by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. So I'm going to bring my guest online right away. This is Thomas Sheridan. Of course, Thomas was with me about 3 weeks ago now. And I think that Thomas probably has some very interesting observations and insights about this particular program. Now, you know, I'm going to take some quotes from the candidates of this year's Apprentice, and these words come right out of their own mouths. And I'm not sure whether Thomas can actually pick up BBC iPlayer in Ireland, so I'm not sure whether he's going to be seeing these quotes for the first time, but it will be interesting to get his comments. So, Thomas, are you there, my friend?
I am indeed, Ian. I'm glad to be here.
It's wonderful to have you back, my friend. So listen, you know, don't hold anything back. And I want to make it absolutely clear that any of our observations and comments that we make about individuals on this program, they shouldn't take it personally, of course, because it is just business, which is pretty much what they would say, don't you think?
Absolutely. That's how they've been conditioned. I did not manage to see it on the BBC iPlayer, but I did manage to track it down on YouTube. And as someone who doesn't watch TV, it was quite interesting how, apart from the fact that I find TV very difficult to watch with all the jump cuts and all the other kinds of mind control techniques they put into it, was the fact that these people were not being authentic to themselves. They could have all been decent and kind and straight up people, but because they are being socially engineered into being basically proto-psychopaths in the service of the control system, they become phonies to themselves. They become fakes. They're no different than cult members waiting for gods and aliens and comets and stuff. They become fakes to themselves. And although they may be very happy to be on TV, and they probably genuinely do believe that if they emulate the pathology that's encouraged in them by people in positions of power, that it will work out for them, it never does. There's no happy ending for these people behaving like this. And this is never shown. You see, you'll never see a follow-up program of you might see one or two who make it in business, of the other 10 who end up with broken lives, broken marriages, addiction problems, and everything else. Just because of this lack of authenticity to themselves and their own lives. And I watched that clip, and it was so appalling to me on so many levels. These people were clearly lying to themselves, and the only reason they were lying to themselves was to whore themselves out to their master, Alan Sugar.
So you don't you don't think they were acting? I mean, you think you're actually of the opinion that what you've seen, they were behaving as they thought they needed to behave to achieve the success they think they need to achieve in the temple of materialism. There's a fundamental difference between adopting the appropriate, or their opinion, the appropriate behaviour, as opposed to acting.
Well, it's acting and self-delusion. It's like they'll convince themselves after a while that this is who they really are, and this is what they really want to be in life, especially as the show progresses. This is what a lot of these programs are about. They're really social engineering models. They want to see how they can alter people, and they're using control subjects who are the guests on these shows in order to see how they can alter society. I mean, I was working in Wall Street back in the day when that movie came out, and I worked with plenty of guys who wanted to be, Gordon Gekko. I'm not kidding. That they did not see it as a kind of a satire or a warning that how bad this stuff is. They were watching that TV show or that film when it was a big hit and thinking it was great. I'll give you an even better one. I can remember that movie Working Girl, how it affected every woman that worked in Wall Street. They all even changed their hairstyles in the scene in the movie where Melanie Griffin, it was back in those days, the hairstyles were all teased up like this on women, that look. And in the part of the film, they showed the metamorphosis of her from not being a kind of a loser to a big business leader. She brings her hair down and crops it straight. I can honestly remember, I'm not joking, Ian, one specific week on Wall Street where every single woman went from having hair up like this to having the Melanie Griffith cut, and that's how powerful these control experiments are.
Indeed. Well, let's take a look at. We're going to look at a number of the candidates, but let's take a look at this particular individual here. This is Stephen, and everything that all these quotes are straight out of their own mouths. And this is Stephen. I'm the best. There's nobody better than me, but it gets even better. I've never come across anyone who is better than me. I mean, what's your reaction when you see comments like that?
Well, I look at the man's face, and I can't tell if he could be a very nice fella, and that could be bravado, that could be immaturity, that could be also insecurity. We can't count that out either. But yeah, it's this sort of self-fulfilling narcissistic self-prophecy that he has to say these things about himself in order to exude confidence. Now, anyone who knows anything knows that people who have confidence, genuine, real confidence, don't go around talking like the way that chap is talking. They just don't. They don't talk like that. The people who have real confidence, it's there. It's apparent. They have it. They have something in their personality that comes off them unspoken. And he seems to be compensating. But the sad thing is that if he says that to himself enough, if he believes that enough, he'll actually rewire his neural pathways where he will end up as obnoxious as those stupid statements he's making are.
Well, absolutely. And this is, of course, the thing that does come through here. I mean, because if these individuals genuinely do believe these comments, then there is a tragic lack of self-reflection. And on the basis that they're all between the ages, I think, of 23 and 35, there's no real excuse there. Now, this is Daniel. And his observation about himself is, I have to be the most competitive man you've ever come across in your life. Well, let me assure him that I doubt that's the case for either Alan Sugar, Karen Brady or Nick Hewer. I'm sure they've come across a hell of a lot of people who are competitive. But, this is a guy who, basically still in his 20s or early 30s, and still feels the compunction to make this kind of observation.
Yes, it's bizarre. It's childish and immature, but it's also sad. And to actually think that people take him seriously when we should be laughing at him, but they want people taking this guy seriously. I mean, if he was to walk into the local pub in any town, you know, and talk like that, he'd be laughed at. But they know this in the control system, and they want arrogant oafs like him walking in and making these kind of pronouncements, these kind of like, you know, fake alpha male chest thumping stupid statements. Okay, he's the most competitive guy he knows. Does that mean he's a winner? No, it just means he's insecure. It just means that they, like you said, they have not reflected on something inside them. And you're absolutely bang on with that observation, Ian. They have not done any kind of self-realization to say, what's missing in me that puts me in a position where I have to go and say things like that, behave like that. And that's because they have not done work inside themselves. And
Yeah.
I think that screams from people like him.
Yeah. Well, this is the first female I've picked up. I mean, there's no particular order here. But this particular lass, Ella Jade, is clearly a scholar. She says, "I am who I am," which, of course, is actually a quote from Exodus 3:14, with Yahweh, who has to be quite possibly one of the most sociopathic psychopaths in history. But in Exodus 14, in his conversation with Moses, of course, when Moses asks who he is, he says, "I am who I am." Well, Ella Jade goes on, and she says, "I believe in who I am." And, you know, so here she is. Thank you, Ella. We now know who you think you are.
And again, she doesn't know who she is.
Exactly.
That's the whole point. I mean, I know I am who I am. It's not the same thing as I know who I am or what I am or how I am. And you're quite right to bring out the quote about Jehovah, the psychopathic demon in the Old Testament pretending to be God. It's the same kind of thing. She's the proto-psychopathic bimbo pretending to be amazing, and it's an infection of consciousness. It's a disease that's running through everybody these days. At some level, we all have to fight it. But these people are not told they're sick. These people are told they're perfectly healthy. Now get out there and infect everyone else.
And I mean, as we'll touch on a bit later as well. I mean. It's got to be a nightmare for these people to build meaningful relationships, because the relationships are going to be extremely superficial if this is how they present themselves.
Yeah, and how can they maintain, okay, assuming that most of them are decent people inside and they do meet somebody and want to have a family, how does someone who's devoted to a self-image of themselves in terms of a business model ever be a decent parent or a loving partner, or someone who puts his or her, you know, real priorities ahead of that of the bottom line of the business of the self-image? It sends out appalling messages to people to tell them, you know, because what they're giving us is a reflection of what the people who run our countries are like, because that's exactly what they think.
I think, you know, that is an extremely astute observation. You know, it is the socio-psychopathic leadership that is being presented as the model, and of course, you know, what they're trying to do is now spread, like you say, their disease right throughout society. No longer content with just getting the socio-psychopathic future successors from Eton and Harrow and Oxford and Cambridge. They now want to make sure that you know, they can actually stem any kind of social revolution by creating this in their own model. Once again, was that almost biblical? The next guy, I have to pick up this guy. This is Sanjay, and Sanjay makes the observation that life's easier when you're better looking, which probably explains why you and I are doing what we're doing, Thomas.
Well, he's not telling a lie, really. He's telling the truth. It's not, you know, it's not that he's saying something that's not true. because life is easier if you are better looking. It's just how it is. You could be a very attractive man or a very attractive woman and have no other attributes, and you will find that life, in terms of opening doors and presenting opportunities to you, will be a lot easier. Where fellas like us have to like struggle all the time, but and find different ways of doing it. But that's okay. I mean, he's not lying there, but at the same time too, it by saying that and repeating that mantra, he's saying, well, it's enough. It's enough. It's like, you see that woman, what's her name? Katie Price Jordan. She's famous for having like two space hoppers on the front of her. And that's it. There's nothing else. She's having like celebrity babies. And that's enough. That's enough. That's all she has to be. And again, it creates a superficiality. It also encourages a notion in society that, like, if your only value is on how much money you can make and how good looking you are, then there's no value to anything else.
Well, look, I'm going to lower the tone as well a little bit, because, one of the observations that I would make about, and I'm sorry just to pick on two people, but Katie Price and Kelly Brook, and that is that their personal lives are basically a car crash. And,
Yes.
they go from one relationship to another. Katie Price is now married to a guy who's admitted that he's cheated on her with her best friend and one of her neighbors, and yet she still is with him. Kelly Brook, just goes from, one guy to the next, and in each case, the guy cheats on them. So, what is it about these women, these women who, they look real good in print, but, obviously, up close and personal, there's maybe a slightly different ballgame, as it were.
Well, I actually met Katie Price once, believe it or not, at the opening of a nightclub in Dublin about 12 years ago.
So you're really Gareth Gates?
Yeah, I'm really Gareth Gates.
Ah, that's where I've seen you before.
A friend of mine had got tickets to the opening of the nightclub, and she was doing DJing or something, and she was the celebrity that was opening it. And I actually got talking to her quite close up, and she had the eyes of a cult member. She looked like her personality had been cored out of her. There was like something genuinely missing behind there, and that's what I think a lot of them are. I think even no matter. And I have to say, I thought she was quite pretty as well. I think she was actually better looking in real life than I expected her to be. But
I've heard a lot of people say that about you.
Yeah, I know. But you see, when you looked into her eyes, there was nothing there. And you know something? Even a guy who might be attracted to a person like that, I truly do believe it. If the soul is not there behind the package, man or woman, that shall we say, what are you going to do for the other, 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day?
Well, hey, listen, I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, because there's another aspect of my areas of interest that, maybe this gives me an opportunity to lead in with here. One of the fascinating reports that I read many years ago was from Katie Price's former partner, husband, Andre, what was his name? The Australian singer. Peter Andre, that's it. Thank you for my prompts there. You can see that I'm unfortunately not up on this pop culture. Anyway, but one of the observations that Peter Andre made was that he was absolutely besotted and in love with Katie Price. But once she'd had just 3 glasses of wine, she became Jordan. And he absolutely detested Jordan. So, I'm assuming that he was fairly accurate with the 3 glasses of wine. But, his description of life with Katie Price and Jordan might as well have been a description about life with 2 completely different people. And, some of the work that's certainly been done in the Netherlands, and it was a book by Ron Dunselman called In Place of the Self. And Dunselman made the observation that, some people who tended to have a bit of a predilection for alcohol or other psychoactives, let's say, tended to be taken over by, or appear to be taken over by, other entities. Now, whether those entities are actually part of their own consciousness or something that manages to encroach on their consciousness when they open the doorways, but it does seem to create this situation of literally not just schizophrenia, but because it is triggered by the alcohol in this case. So what's your observation on that, Thomas?
I absolutely 100% agree. I've seen it myself in my own life. When I was a kid, there was a next door neighbor. He was the sweetest man you'd ever meet. He was a taxi driver, and if he got drunk, he turned into a demon. The same person wasn't in there. It was a monster that took over. And people used to say, "Oh, the real personality comes out because he's drunk." I don't believe that for 1 second at all. I believe that an actual replacement personality got in instead. There's a lot of evidence for this stuff. I mean, this is a big part of my work I don't normally talk about, but I'm very much interested in the idea of consciousness becoming infected through things like, anything from the alcohol to using a Ouija board to channeling and all this stuff. And it's not what the person doing it thinks it's happening. It's almost like a pathological consciousness, what the Islamic world calls the jinn.
Yeah.
Infects them, literally infects them. And I've seen that with my own eyes. I'll never forget how this man changed. Not only did his behavior change in terms of his gentleness was gone out of him, but if you looked at his face, it was a different face. It was almost like there was a being inside there that was using the plasticity of his skin on his face to push its own face into his features. And I saw that firsthand, and I'll never forget that. I absolutely do believe that. And that's a very profound thing that Peter Andre said, and it's a very disturbing thing. And I totally believe that's true. There's something even that's why I'm always telling people, look, if you're doing ayahuasca and drugs, make sure you know the people you're doing the ayahuasca and the tripping with, the mushrooms, very, very well, because they may have something inside them that might come out during this session that you never would experience before.
Exactly, and I have made the observation many times that anybody who participates in any psychoactive experimentation should actually treat it as exactly the same way that they would treat a dangerous sport. It's not something to take lightly, and it's not something that you should do without reading as much on the instruction manuals, as it were, as you possibly can. And I remember, myself, in my more hedonistic days, there was a particular individual who, it was maybe a little bit more than 3 glasses of wine, but after the proverbial skinful, he would actually black out. And as he blacked out, you could see he was blacking out, he would start to slur, and eventually, he would just sort of nod. And he would be gone for maybe a minute or so, and then all of a sudden it would be like, well, hello, right, let's party. And the following day, he would have no recollection beyond the point at which he blacked out. So it was literally as though some other entity, in this case, it was actually quite benign, because the other entity that came in was extremely humorous. In fact, a lot more humorous than the individual, was himself. But
Yes.
It was something that occurred on a on a relatively regular basis, and it got to the point where we would know pretty much what was going to happen, and because the other entity was actually quite hilarious, then it was a not too unpleasant experience, but it was nonetheless quite disconcerting that the guy himself would never have any recollection of it.
Well, that's some powerful stuff we're talking about here, because I actually believe this is what happened to Mel Gibson, the film director. He's had problems with drinks, and when he drinks, people say that the same kind of thing. He falls asleep for a bit, and then a new person comes in who's very hostile and racist. And I watched Whoopi Goldberg, who's an African American actress, defending, after some tape had been released of him on this like really intense sort of like racist rant. Although it wasn't particularly racist, he used racist terms, but it was enough to destroy her career in Hollywood. And she was saying, "I've met the man. I've stayed with him for days on end. The man is not racist." And people were saying that things around her, like, "Well, isn't drink bringing out the real Mel Gibson?" And she goes, "No, that's not who he is. I don't believe that." So I think we should be very careful when we hear people say, "Oh, the real him or the real her comes out when drink is on them." I think, like your observation, my observation is someone else. And I'll tell you something else about Mel Gibson. Now, you look at his power in Hollywood and his ability, but he also made that really strange movie, The Passion of the Christ, which is a very intense S&M bloody movie where he basically portrayed the demon Jehovah for what it really was. Because it's almost, if you look at that film, outside sort of like a Christian fundy thing, he's really telling you what this beast in heaven did to this young man in order to prove he was the son of God. Ultimately, the blame was with Jehovah, the demon, and this is what the Gnostic said. This is what the Cathar said, and it was after that film came out that Mel Gibson started to become what we say his crazy phase. He started drinking again. He left his wife for some, his wife of many years for some young Russian chick that he'd met, and so on. And then he's like getting drunk, being recorded on film saying these incredible rants. And I believe that he probably would have been a prime target if there are pathological, non-human entities out there. And I'm saying this live on the internet now for the first time, which I actually do believe there is. And that's what I've discovered. The only conclusion I've come to from all the years of studying psychopathology, that it's something else not human involved in all this. And that's probably what happened to him. And this is why so many people defended him, even like when he went on anti-Jewish rants. So many Jewish people said, no, that's not the real him. It's like something else gets into him when he got drunk. And I totally agree with that.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the book that for me is probably the definitive discussion on this subject is the book. It's called In Place of the Self. By Ron Dunselman. It was published, I think, in the Netherlands originally. I'm sure it's free. Well, I'm going to say free because I don't think it was quite an expensive tome. But it absolutely looks at the effects of the psychoactives, and it really covers the spectrum, everything from alcohol right through to methamphetamine, crack cocaine, marijuana, the whole ball game. And whilst acknowledging that not everybody is affected in the same way, but it makes the case based on case studies with a lot of people who work in the counselling of people that have become addicted to these substances, and acknowledges the distinct possibility that it's either a very deep alternate consciousness that resides within, or potentially something that is outside that, as you say, invades the physical vehicle to effectively get an opportunity to get a temporary ride in this third dimensional reality. Yeah.
I mean, I like a beer, and that's as far as it goes with me. I've never drunk hard, alcohol or anything like that. But when you think of the terms they even use, spirits, the demon drink, the gin, it's like, wow, are we getting some kind of synchronistic Jungian kind of insight into how dangerous strong liquor, spirits and shorts, like people who drink like triple brandies and all that kind of nonsense. I mean, that goes straight to, that development in the brain. But there's also a thing that even here in Ireland, in this part of Ireland, where they still make the poaching and stuff like that. There's lots of this one of the things that people say we don't need regulation of it is because the people who make the poaching, the farmers and the wild mountain men and so on, they will not sell a bottle to someone that they think might be, and this is from the olden days, I don't know if they still think it, who might be prone to being taken by the fairies. You know what I'm saying? Meaning that if they were to start drinking the potjie, and this other personality would come in. So it's been well known for a long time.
Absolutely. Well, it may seem as though we drifted a little bit off topic, but my observation would be that the sort of personalities, and I'll use that term loosely, that we're dealing with and talking about on programs like The Apprentice are those that are perhaps, because they are perhaps uncomfortable in their own skin and they are adopting this facade, they are potentially very susceptible to this. Because, if you look at The Apprentice as well, in the house there is always a bottle of wine or two floating around. But let's have a look at another one of the candidates here. This is Pamela. And her observation is she loves talking. Nothing wrong about that. She says, I talk an awful lot. Well, she probably wouldn't be the first woman to admit to that. But then she says, I could go on and on and on about myself. So, this is being asked how to describe herself. She says, I can talk a lot about myself.
Well, I'm not. I'm not suggesting anything about this lady or anyone on this show, but that's exactly how cocaine addicts are. That's who people who are cokeheads talk about them. They will bore the backside off you. That's what they're like. All they talk about is themselves and all this. And cocaine is rampant in this scene as well. And that's also a drug that I believe allows. See, I'm delighted you brought this stuff up, in because it is important. Because not only do you have to have narcotics and alcohol and those kinds of drugs, but we live in an age where fame is the most intoxicating drug of all. And that's these people are intoxicated. They're addicts to fame. They're addicts to success. And any kind of addiction will allow these things in these personalities to be altered, manipulated, infected, invaded, whatever you want to say. And so far, so many of these people seem to be like this. I mean, I actually believe that in certain environments, these things run like a virus. We saw that in the Big Brother house with Jade, the Jade Goody, the celebrity one with Jade Goody in that infamous racial instance. Well, people forget that spread like wildfire within that house among those three women. And I really do believe these things can multiply infect. And that's why they stick them in the same buildings, in the same rooms and everything. And as you said, they're always sticking. There's always the place is always there's a rake of drink always around the place, and that kind
Maybe
of thing.
we should actually, not that we're casting any aspersion, but maybe we should encourage the BBC to do some regular drug testing. I mean, again, I say we're not casting aspersion, but we know it's rife in that scene. Let's have a look at Roseanne, because this is something, or Roshin, I think she pronounces it. I mean, this was a classic for me. She says, "I need to be the CEO." Well, okay, that's an interesting ambition, and she wouldn't be alone in that. But she goes on. There's the CFO, the COO, the CRO. I thought that was Criminal Records Office.
Yeah.
But then she says, everything. I need to be the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the CRO, everything. And although I haven't picked up on the individual who made this particular quote, but there was a guy who made the observation. He said, there's no I in team, but there's 5 in individual brilliance.
I saw that clip with Roisin talking. She's Irish too. She has that typical South Dublin, snooty, I'm better than you, and but you'll know what kind of thing going on. She's a typical product of Irish business schools and Irish management training courses. They're all like that. The ones who missed out on the Celtic Tiger, but they're determined to get a piece of the action somehow. And she's very typical of that. I want to be this, I want to be that. How about being true to yourself, Roisin? How about that? How about going through your life for once, taking a look in the mirror and saying, what am I about really, and is this the way I need to go? These people, you're actors, but the thing is, you're acting. The only audience you have is yourself.
But I mean, do you think you could spend an evening in her company?
Oh, I've spent an evening in many people's company like that, and the only way I get through it was drinking. Honest to God, it was the only way I could deal with them. Yeah, I have. Now, you'd meet some people like that who would be actually quite decent people, and they would be okay when you got them out of that environment. But yeah, I mean, there was a scene in the film Wall Street where I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this show, where Charlie Sheen says he got sick of this woman because it was like effing the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the sort of mindset that he gets into, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And obviously the sex literally just becomes part of the addiction. Yeah,
and it's like everything else. They'll get no satisfaction from their lives.
I've lost Thomas. Oh, no, okay, you're back with me.
Yeah.
Well, Thomas, the good news is there's one guy there, and this is going to be an interesting guy, I think, because I did actually, I will admit, watch the first 2 episodes on BBC iPlayer after it had been transmitted, of course, because I have absolutely no intention of ever having a TV license, so I will always make sure that I watch it well after its airing date. But this individual was quite refreshing, and he's actually quite refreshing in the shows itself. And this is Solomon, and this is the only piece of self-reflection that I've actually seen in the programs that I've watched. And he says, I think sometimes my enthusiasm can annoy people. Thomas?
Yeah, a normal man.
I've lost you.
I'm back. I'm here. Can you see me? Hello. I can see myself. I can hear you. Hello.
Sorry, Thomas, we have a technical failure here.
I can hear you, no problem.
I can hear you now. Yeah, it was a technical failure at my end.
Okay. He seems like a nice guy, a normal guy. The fact that he's actually had a self-reflective moment. The irony being that is, and we're back to like what we were saying at the beginning about people who are genuinely cool don't actually go around going, "I'm cool," like the Fonz. They just are. He's probably the one who'll probably end up winning it for the simple reason that he's capable of self-reflection.
Well, that is if he can actually sort of keep all the knives out of his back that will inevitably, be coming in his direction, particularly if he survives the sort of early rounds of the process. Now, I know that when you and I were talking earlier, I was mentioning that a book that I used to flag up when I was doing training back in my oil field days, and I used to flag it as a joke. But having said that, I mean, I'm sure in any organization and, in particular in the oil industry, there's always the exceptions that prove the rule. And there's one particular guy who, would have been the classic Apprentice candidate who is today an officer of one of my former companies. And there's another guy who's recently retired. And, I'll name him because he was just an all-round nice guy. And he made a tremendous success of his career. In fact, he finished his career as chairman and chief executive officer of Baker Hughes. I want to stress for a number of reasons he's no longer in that role. He retired about a year ago. But this is a guy called Chad Deaton. And Chad Deaton was just a really, really nice guy. I mean, so much so that he was almost the nth degree exception that proves the rule. But there was a book that I used to flag up, and the book was called How to Be a Complete Bastard in Business. And there were one or two people who literally thought that I was introducing it as part of the training manual. And in many cases, of course, they didn't last very long, because one of the things about the oil industry is, it's a case of be careful who you piss off on your way up, because you may well meet them on your way down.
I remember that book back in the day. I remember seeing that on someone's desk. He was the guy I worked with who was like one of the people that entered this show, who thinks that he has to attain some kind of stereotype, hard ass stereotype of himself in order to get ahead. Meanwhile, the real top managers are reading books like Machiavelli's The Prince.
Yeah,
it's one of those classic men from the boys kinds of things.
No, absolutely. Well, I found a couple of other books that maybe some of these candidates from The Apprentice might want to read. And this one is Dylan Radigan's Greedy Bastards. This is a good book, because he says this is about how we can stop corporate communist banksters and other vampires from sucking America dry. Well, unfortunately, those people who put themselves forward for programs like The Apprentice, you are being groomed to be those vampires. And, whilst you're effectively sucking the proverbial corporate, then, I'm sure that the rewards in the material realm will be absolutely wonderful. But, do you really want to sell your soul for that one? And, for those who are looking to get the edge, you might want to pick up on this book, How to Spot a Bastard by His Star Sign. So there you go. That's if we see that, well, obviously the current, what's the word I'm looking for? I've got a mental failure. The current series of The Apprentice was all pre-recorded, but if we see this on the table in a future series, then we'll know they maybe watched this episode of Humanity versus Insanity. And one for the women, Beautiful Bitch. Now, I just want to pick up on a point that you made about, you got to be good looking to get on, or one of the candidates did. And I would have to agree with you that certainly in UK society, that does seem to be the case. I would have to acknowledge that certainly nearly 20 years ago when I was working in the US, that was absolutely not the case. And I mean, back in the mid-90s, diversity was absolutely at the core of the business philosophy of the time, and and it was absolutely about merit. I mean, it was a true meritocracy. Perhaps it was the last era in which we had a true meritocratic society in the middle of the Clinton years, because it certainly changed, obviously, once the neocons got back in control. So yeah, beautiful bitch. There you go. That's one for the women. And of course, this is the one that really, this is the piece of artwork that really sums it up for all of those who want to put themselves forward for this kind of reverse voyeurism. It's all about me, all about me. And unfortunately, Thomas, it seems that we are in this apparently irreversible spiral of programming, from even preschool right through a dumbed down school system to, everything of the conditioning through the media, to literally drill the last dregs of humanity out of these people and turn them into literally soulless, self-centered robots.
Yeah. The triumph of the automaton. That's really what we're heading towards. And it's been going on for a long time. I'd like to recommend a book here. This is Brainwash by Peter, I think his first name is, Dominic, Stretafield. And this book has, if you want to know why we've gotten to the place we have, this is a book everyone should read, because it begins with the days of Pavlovian conditioning and Watson's behaviorism. And it takes us through the story of the Soviets and the Chinese brainwashing camps and re-engineering camps. And then they showed how those things were taken out then after MKUltra in the US. And they were showing how those things were taken out of there and brought into the religions first, in terms of trying to brainwash people, like the evangelical religions and then the cults, and then entered into the world of big business and everything, entertainment, and how it's all been socially engineered from about 100 years ago right to today. And that's what these people are. You see, they're saying, oh, I'm on The Apprentice. I'm going to make it big time in business because I'm the best. At the end of the day, all you are is a lab rat like the rest of us. You're just a lab rat who gets closer to the scientists than the rest of us. We all know what happens to the lab rats that the scientist takes a specific interest in. They're usually the ones who get the most horrific tests done on them, and that's how they'll all end up. They'll all end up miserable and empty. And they, like I said, there's never any follow-up programs on what happens to these people 5 years down the road, how their lives ended out, if they renounced everything and followed a spiritual path, or renounced everything and set up a regular normal family and got themselves a regular small business, or if indeed they did succeed, or if indeed many of them became casualties, which I can assure you many do. There is no reward. You're just a higher level of slave. That's all you are. You're a house slave to your master, but you're still a slave, because I can tell you, no matter what people think about getting ahead and making the big time, the same old aristocrats still run this world, and they own the banks and everything else, and they'll always own the corporations and the society, and they have done for centuries, and there's no sign of them losing their grip. And this is where these people will end up one day. They'll realize, look, there was a very good survey done a few years ago where they went around to hospices and they interviewed people as who were dying, and they asked them what was their biggest regret in life. And number one regret of all was, I wish I never focused on my career and spent more time with my friends and the people I loved. Now, that was a previous generation. Can you imagine what kind of casualties these guys are going to end up?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I've made a similar observation that with my youngest son. Basically, in the first sort of 7 years of his life, I was with him 24/7, and I was, so fortunate to be able to do that compared to, the situation with my elder children, where unfortunately I thought, I had to be chasing the dollar, and I feel very sad, for those people who don't have that opportunity. And I have often jest that those who are 55 are still doing what they were doing at 35. They missed an opportunity. Well, Thomas, we've come to the end of the show, and I just want to actually wrap up today's discussion with this observation. If we can bring this on the screen. And this is something that somebody actually flagged up to me earlier today. And it says, if anything is going to save civilization from tyranny, it will be ordinary people like us. Well, let me make this observation. There is no such thing as ordinary people. That's what the ruling elite also want to program. That actually just be a good slave. Just be an ordinary person. Every single human being on this planet has extraordinary capabilities and capacities. And in fact, every one of the young men and the young women that we have been discussing tonight who put themselves into the spotlight by becoming candidates for the Apprentice, there is no question every one of those individuals has unique skills and capabilities. What is just so sad is that they have succumbed to the programming of using those skills and abilities for service to self, for pure self-gratification. I wonder what the situation would be if everyone recognized the wonderful contribution they could make to humanity if they focused their unique attributes on service to others. Thanks very much for joining me. I'll catch you in 45 minutes on Fracking Nightmare.